Here's one of those little tips that's worth its weight in gold. And you never think this is important until a day you go to work on your crutch and all of a sudden something's locked up. Now before I'm going to work with glue around these blind nuts, what I want to do, I want to get the blind nut to have just a little bit of oil on it. I want to get it right even. Now I've got this even with the top because I do not want any CA or epoxy or anything to get down in those holes. And many times what I would do is I'd be working here and then gluing in and then go to take the bolt out and it's locked up solid. And then when it does that, it usually spins the blind nut, and now you're really, that is such a good tip. Just one tiny drop, any kind of oil, chain lube, anything. Just anytime you're going to work around blind nuts with especially thin CA, but even epoxy, it's going to always have a tendency to find its way in there in the worst possible way. This kind of stacks the deck in your favor. Now here is the reason, or one of the reasons, that I wanted to have these blind nuts recessed when I made the crutch. And when I've laid that down, I mean, this crutch is absolutely perfectly flat, as if you put it in a mill. And in fact, at one point in time I was thinking, well, in fact Midgley did it. We put a carbon fiber crutch in a mill and Dave milled it perfectly flat. But beside the point, this one is real nice. Now remember, I don't have any glue up on the front here, so that's an issue. Now I got to get a real good alignment, and what I did, I scored a little line here that I can use for reference, and that reference line tells me how far forward or back this has to go, so that when I bend these pieces, they all kind of line up at the same time. Now, but the first step is going to be to get this glued in place, and just get this nice 90-degree and let it dry. Now I had originally thought what I was going to do is tack this with CA, and the more I thought about it, I said, you know what, I'll just use epoxy. And the reason is because I'll have plenty of work time to maneuver it back and forth, and I really don't need, you know, we're really not in a rush today. We have so much shop work to do, so that'll just give me a little bit of work time. So the first thing I want to do before I do this, back to what we did before, is lay out a sheet of saran wrap with Teflon, whatever I can get, so nothing sticks to the table. That's always a very easy thing to do. I don't know if I put this on the tape already, but Karen gave me this little tip. There's saran wrap premium, which is a little bit thicker when you're going to do this kind of a, where you want to protect your work table, or you don't want glue to stick to something, and nothing. A picture that what would be the easiest way to do this, because again we're going to go from the back blind nut back, gluing it in place. I don't need to glue the whole thing at this point in time. In fact, I don't want to. But what I do want to do is make sure I establish a 90-degree edge. And it doesn't matter which way I do it. I can do it this way and just measure the 90-degree, because I'm only going to put one in. But what has to happen here, let me show this up close. What has to happen is I want to glue this, but I want this to be free. I'm really gluing from here back. And then I'm going to pull just the plywood up tight, and then I'm going to just pull the wood up tight. But I need to have this accurate. I can't have it too far back or too far forward. So what I have to do, and I've already established this mark, but I wanted to show how I did it, is do a roll mark. Now line this up, since we've got everything 90, hopefully. I know if I roll this on there, and now I establish on the other side exactly where I'm going to be. And that looks right on the money. It looks as close as can be. Let's see, I'm referencing off the back of the mount pad this way. But I've done the roll. That dotted line up there is the center line for lining up anything that needs to reference off the center line. There's the reference for my tank shim. Here's the reference back here where I have to get that in alignment. So the easiest way, and I guess, and again, I don't want to say there's one super way and one way that's not going to work at all, but epoxy will work, CA will work, and I'm sure aliphatic resin. Harold Price used to do all this with aliphatic resin with carpenter's glue, and that worked fine. And I know Joe Adamusco does a lot of his stuff with various glues, including Ambroid. So And there might even be a little weight saving on something other than epoxy, but the one thing about epoxy, you have the chance, as you've seen with Rich Jacobone's crutch, to, if this is crooked in the final alignment, we can just hit it with the heat gun before it gets too settled in and pull it apart. Hopefully we're not going to have to do that, because we really would like to get this absolutely straight, right on the money. Now again, if we were using secondary bonding resin, which we have used, on composite parts, yeah, that'd be fine. But I think for this, in this case, since we're not in any rush, I try never to be in a rush, if at all possible. A lot of reasons for that. Number one is there's always something else to do here while glue dries. So in this case, while the glue is drying, go over there and lay up some of my molds for the day, and I'll be done with that. And what I wanted to do is take a glue imprint here. I wanted to put way more glue than I really need on here. And I want to just show this. And what I want to do is, I know where my mark is. Yeah, oh, Rich, when Rich was over here the last time, he had basically had problems with his crutch. Now I'm going to press that down and pull it up and see if I have a good mark. Yeah, that's pretty good. But just to be sure, I can take here as a little bit. To make sure, I just want to make sure I get a good glue footprint up here, right up to the first bolt. Now this is why I want saran wrap on the table. I don't want to wind up having an issue with that either. Okay, that's right on the money. That's right on the money. And I'll just put this aside to dry. But again, if this is wrong or out of alignment for some reason, you want to go right to the heat gun, heat it, and pull it apart before you wind up that you have to eat it. Now while that's drying, of course, if you were in kind of a rush, you could just hit this with a little hair dryer. But I can tell you another tip that doesn't work. Don't use a heat gun. The heat gun will bubble the epoxy and you'll just wind up making chewing gum instead of a good joint. Best thing, just let it sit there. We'll come back to this a little later. And it's a lot easier. See, part of this whole assembly thing is trying to figure out step A, step B, step C. This makes it easy. This is like when you do a flap and you glue the hinges in one side first. When you try to glue a hinge in and you're doing both sides, the hinge is sloppy and moving around and it's a mess. You glue one side in, get the barrel oiled. Same thing with this. If you get one side straight, and that is about as close to 90 degrees as humanly possible, you can check it with a triangle. Once it is, just let the epoxy dry, and now we give that, a minimum of an hour or so. But it won't matter, because when we're done, that part is going to be straight, and then we can go on to the next part of the fuselage assembly. But we'll kind of babysit it while I'm working over on a molding bench. I'll just come back here and make sure a mouse hasn't eaten it or something, or that it isn't a little bit crooked. Sometimes you look at it and it's a little bit off one way, and you can still move it just a hair, right up to the point that the epoxy kicks off. Now, all while this is drying, and while I'm doing other work in the shop, I'm just what I call babysitting, going by with the 90-degree triangle. Make sure I'm not building a pretzel. And it's funny how if you build a fuselage and the first joint you make is a little bit crooked, everything from that point on, it's like imagine laying that first row of bricks and they're straight as an arrow. You do them with a string. The next row of bricks, the third one. Well, I can remember making a barbecue oh God, when I was a kid, buying a bag of cement and buying some bricks or stealing them or whatever I did, and having no clue about getting the first row of bricks in. You know, I flattened the ground, what I thought was flat, no level, no plumb line, just laid the bricks down, put the next row on, the next row. Pretty soon the bricks are going uphill, then I try to compensate, they're going downhill. Well, when you looked at it, it really was not the way it should be. Then I learned about levels, lines, how to get, and doing bricks is easy. Doing bricks is just about as easy as it gets if somebody gives you the basics. This is one of the basics from this point on. Everything's got to be center line and 90 degrees. And it's amazing to me how many planes that I've seen have serious trim issues that you can never get resolved because the fuselage has something in there that's not right. And then you try to make up for it with some other compensating way, or if the plane hunts, you wind up putting 5 ounces of nose weight in it and you lose the CG where it rotates nice. Nightmare. It's got to start with this first joint being 90 degrees and everything working off a center line, and then you've got a fighting chance. Now when I'm done with that joint, boy, that's just about as nice as it gets. But now, of course, I'm going to do the other side next, and it'll be a repeat of this, so I just need to jig it up. But then this is the critical part, to get building in that curved nose strength. That extra little strength comes from, if we had glued these together now, this would probably split. But because it's separated, and we're done with the other side, we can do one part at a time. And it just makes it so much nicer by doing it that way. Now what I've kind of done is just jig this side up, just roughly, because I know I'm going to come back and check it with my 90-degree triangle anyway. I'm going to take the glue the same as the other side, take some epoxy, work it in this area, take a glue footprint, then make sure I have my alignment, and in this case I've got 2 alignment little tangs, and then jig it up in such a way there'll be just a little bit of pressure on it while it's drying. See, it's a lot easier to work. If you try to do this with both sides loose and you're moving and then you go to join them at the tail and they're crooked, this way I think it may be a little more time consuming, but I think it's the easiest too. And maybe a way that'll make your building just a little bit easier. Now what I want to do is just take a glue footprint. I know what my alignment marks are here. Oh, that's nice. That's good. Anytime you're doing this kind of a joint, it's always good to take a footprint. Make sure you got glue on all the areas that you'd like to have. And we can just line this back up. Get some weights or something holding it in place. Now the most important thing while that's drying is that the 2 fuselage edges don't go down at the end of the fuselage and do this, because that's when you build in just an irrecoverable warp. So this looks good. We're just going to let this sit in what amounts to be under a little bit of pressure, and when we come back to this, we should have the bones of our crutch. Well, that worked out just about as well as I could ever imagine, and we are really nice and straight. Now the next thing is I want to get epoxy, and I want to get a piece of 64th plywood to work it right down up in there, get both of these laminated together, and then put a clamp on them and let it dry. I want to make sure I got epoxy all the way up to the end on both of these. It's really not super important to get every drop on the fuse side as it is on the doublers. The doublers to the mounts are the joint that I'm real concerned with. Now what's going to happen is when we push that in, that's really going to spread. So the first thing is get a little rag and let's get the extra off. I think what we'll do is one side at a time rather than try to rush this through. Now usually I'll take a little piece of scrap. Let me just line this up. Let's see if we got the clamp at the right. Because that epoxy is going to ooze out when we do this. And these are these little quick clamps that you get from Home Depot. Very handy. I should have another one here. And of course the only reason for putting the balsa wood there is so that we get a little bit better clamp action on it. And I can get all the extra epoxy out. Something like this, when you're trying to do it, it's just easier to, a little bit of alcohol on a paper towel. It's just easier to get one side to dry and then work on the other side. And get whatever oozes out here just squashed away. Hit that with a little bit of heat, and it'll take a few minutes to kick off. And then we'll do the other side. Remember, you don't want to overdo the heat. The heat is good, and basically because the shop is cold, it lets the epoxy get a better bite. But as I found out the hard way with the heat gun, you don't want to have it that you put, as soon as you put bubbles in the epoxy, you've got it way too hot. Now I'm going to give that plenty of time to dry again, and I'll just come back, do the same thing to the other one off camera, and we'll be ready to move to the next step. We're actually getting a lot done today. Oh, I got these photos today, and while that nose section of the epoxy's curing, I'm checking this out. It's from Hank de Jong, and he's basically referencing off the table with a ruler for their center line, and I'm assuming that's an okay way to do it. I can see how he's got the back shimmed up. Whether he's doing alignment here or building, it looks like what he's doing is building a new fuselage. Now, he had some repair photos that I was unable to download, so I may not have the whole set here. And his plane looks an awful lot like a Cobra. And by the way, Jimmy Borelli is off the chart excited about building up one of those Cobra kits. So, be looking forward to see how that works out for Jimmy. But again, I'm missing some of these pictures. Some came through, some didn't. So, see, this makes more sense to me. He's lining up the nose section, and we've had this even on the World Championship videos, Hank's plane, and it looks like he's repairing or replacing the whole back of the fuselage here, which you can imagine is pretty labor intensive, and you got to get the alignments right. Pretty much what we've been discussing on this video. So this kind of ties into it real nice. Now, I wish I had the first set of these pictures. That's the problem, is when some come through and some don't. Or I may be getting them backwards, I don't know. This looks like he's got the job finished. Now, I was able to get the rest of these pictures from Hank, and this looks like, yes, he's doing a repair. He made some geodetic fuse sides, and he's laminating them onto the front of the plane where it's not damaged. So I'll go through these real quick, but I always like to see how people do this, especially now. He obviously has got a good way of doing it, because when we saw him and met him at the Worlds, he's an extremely nice guy and a very competitive builder and flyer. And you see what he's doing here is he's attaching to the part of the plane that isn't damaged basically some new fuselage sides with geodetic reinforcement. Or I think what he's doing is attaching the deformers in geodetically like that, which is of course the best way to do it. Now look at the stick he's using to do the hinge line trick. Very similar to how we do it. And his ruler to reference up off the table to make sure everything's in good alignment here. I'm assuming that's a straight working bench. And it looks like, since we've seen the plane already finished, or maybe I have these pictures backwards, because they came in several batches, and I've really had an ordeal trying to figure out. See, because I don't have captions. When people send pictures like this, it's real nice if they'd send captions. But I'll tell you one thing, I just love to see when people get a plane back in the air. You laugh all you want. It's always tragic when we lose one, but when you get one back in the air, boy, it's a good feeling. Just ask Mike Kajeski. Just ask Rich Jacobone. Ask John DeTavio. Ask me. You know, I think the problem with the whole thing is that he didn't send these in a sequence. He's got them in just random order. This would have been handy to see. These would have been the first ones. But he's obviously got this repair under control, and you know, this would be a great, since he's taking all the pictures, a great guest column for if he wants to take my column for one cycle. Do a guest column. I love it.